Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. It's our first show of April and we appreciate you spending a little bit of your day with us. We do want to mention, as United States and global health officials continue to address the spread of COVID-19, UNL is monitoring the situation, and updates can be found at the address on your screen and on the Market Journal website. As we begin our broadcast today, earlier this week, University of Illinois Ag Economist Dr. Scott Irwin sat down with me from his home in Illinois to discuss the latest developments with COVID-19 and its impact on agriculture. And one thing many of you may have noticed is lower prices at the pump, which has been unwelcome news for ethanol producers. Scott joined me to share his thoughts on that and more in the markets.
Well, it's definitely an unprecedented situation. We're looking at a situation where in our major cities and we're under a major lockdown that we're looking at probably 50 to 75% less gasoline usage for as long as these lockdowns last. So it's definitely a tough time for ethanol producers because the amount of ethanol that we use here domestically in the U.S. is directly related to the total amount of miles that we drive and the amount of gasoline that we use. So it's definitely a negative situation for as long as this pandemic is in force.
Scott, how much of a drop in ethanol consumption can we expect in the near term?
Well, we did an analysis that we released late last week that indicates, someplace between 800 million gallons and 1 billion gallons if the restrictions last through all the way through April, which it looks like they're going to now, and part of May. So a big chunk, we could lose as much as 1 billion gallons of ethanol usage. And that's not taking into account anything that happens after the most severe restrictions are lifted, say in May.
One potential Band-Aid I've read about is some ethanol producers have asked about applying alcohol for hand sanitizer. Why are they running into roadblocks there?
Well, I don't know the regulatory details on that. I suspect it's as much as anything, they have to get the appropriate regulatory approvals to be making a different product from what is their standard product mix. And then secondly, they have the logistics of getting those alcohol supplies to the hand sanitizer manufacturers. All of that has to be worked out, and we're trying to do this in a matter of days or a week or so. So I suspect that those are the big holdups.
What about corn that isn't being used for ethanol? Any advice for those producers?
Well, at this point, probably the best thing that we can say is just hold on because we really don't think that this pandemic crisis is going to last, another complete year. Hopefully, in 2 to 3 months, we're through the worst of it and we're beginning to see some recovery. And so that suggests that holding right now is probably the best strategy.
Let's get a quick check on soybeans now. How are we looking on that front?
Well, soybeans have actually done reasonably well. On one hand, soybeans benefit because of the reduction in ethanol production because a co-product of ethanol production is DDGS, which is a substitute for soybean meal. It's also a substitute for corn in feed rations. So, but on net, there's clearly an expectation that soybean meal use is going to go up because of the problems in ethanol. And we're also seeing some port closures and some slowdowns in South America. China's starting to come back into the market. So relatively speaking, things probably are looking better for soybeans than corn and ethanol right now.
And Scott, since the coronavirus outbreak has just completely taken up our news cycle, what commodities have you seen that have maybe suffered the most, or which ones haven't been as affected as much?
Well, Crude oil is taking the biggest hit because it's got the coronavirus economic impact plus a price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia going on. So that's definitely the worst. The price there is down over 60% right now from where we started at the beginning of the year. Livestock, live cattle and lean hog futures are now down about the same as the stock market, between 20 and 25%. And we see corn and soybeans more in that 10 to 15% range. And the one standout is wheat. We now see no net loss as we've seen a major recovery in wheat prices as people are basically raiding our grocery stores for wheat and bakery products.
And I know it's still early with this pandemic, so answer this question the best you can. How long of a recovery do you think we're looking at?
Best case, probably 3 months, and probably more realistic, it will take us 12 to 18 months to fully work our way through this, unless we just have some kind of really miraculous progress on a vaccine in the next 6 months.
Finally, Scott, can you leave us with some good news for producers who are trying to make decisions in these tough times? Are there any opportunities for them?
Well, it's been kind of hidden, but there's been some really good news on the renewable fuels obligations, the RFS. A court case was ruled on in recent weeks, and we've had this huge controversy over small refinery exemptions for the renewable fuel standards, and the court ruling effectively killed that program, which was a source of so much anger and political heat here in the Corn Belt. And once we get through this pandemic, it looks like we're going to have probably much fuller implementation of those RFS standards than we thought just a few weeks ago.
Thanks to Scott for being on the show this week. Moving on to the livestock markets now, and also this week I was joined by Iowa State University Livestock Economist Dr. Lee Schulz. The coronavirus outbreak has added instability to this sector of ag as well. He joined me to talk about that, and I began by asking how cattle producers and cattle packers are responding to the crisis.
It's really important to put this into context that we're very much in uncharted territory. So we expect significant gyrations in prices as the market is attempting to find a market clearing price. Now we know that futures markets and to some degree cash markets, they overreact. What they're trying to do is anticipate those prices, and in doing so, they may overreact to that. So I want to kind of break down some of those prices when we look across the beef supply chain. And so, I think it's important to note that the cutout value has been very strong, really depending on what metrics you look at. If you compare year over year, the cutout is 7% higher than a year ago. If you look at the last 4 weeks, that cutout has gained 17%. But when you dig into the data, it's really important to understand where that increase has come from. And it's predominantly come from the chuck and the round, which are the major ingredients into ground beef. So as we've seen consumers transition from eating away from home to very much in their homes now, we've seen that very strong demand for ground beef, and that's been driving a lot larger cutout values. Now, where we see the cattle price, and I think where we've seen the biggest reaction is, yes, major gyrations, but also we've seen those prices erode significantly over the last several months, and especially when we look over the last several weeks. And so that's created a bit of a mismatch between what box beef prices are and what cattle prices are. I would importantly highlight, though, that cattle are sold a variety of different ways. And we've seen that, over the course of just, if I look at 2 weeks ago, prices, they range from about 108 per hundredweight for negotiated cattle here in Iowa, all the way up to, for forward contract, $124 per hundredweight. So that does show that there's still significant variation in cattle prices being reported. And so sometimes if we note, what the lowest price is, that's going to show a much bigger mismatch between box beef than what, some of the highest prices being sold for. We have seen the market obviously pick up. If I look at the last 2 weeks here, and the week ending 3/29 here in Iowa, negotiated prices were just south of 119 per hundredweight.
And Lee, real quick on pork, what are the strains this outbreak has put on those markets?
It's very much been similar to, as we look across the livestock industry, lower prices are being faced by producers. And that's, been a significant challenge. Now, I think when you look at the pork industry, they rely on a very large and skilled labor supply. This was already challenged as we looked at unemployment rates and the growth we've seen in the hog industry. And this even potentially could cause a bigger issue there. When you look at the way the hog operation, hog industry operates, it's a very well-oiled, fine-tuned machine, right? And when it's operating normally, it's a very efficient way of doing business. But if we put some kinks in this, I think that really does impact the pork industry, and we could see long-lasting impacts beyond just the price impacts that we're seeing today.
Are there any sectors within the livestock industry that are better prepared to handle this period of instability, or maybe areas that won't be impacted as much?
I think there's really two ways to kind of look at this. First, biology really prevents livestock producers to responding to price changes. And so when you look at the timeline for production from farm to retail, this really ranges from 2 months for poultry to 2 years for beef production. And so given that, I think you're seeing producers not able to really respond to these lower prices, even though they may want to, given what the profitability outlook potentially is. Now, we're dealing with large production, and that's going to continue regardless. You really can't stop that production, and so we expect that record production in 2020. But the second way to, I think, look at this, and this maybe more benefits the beef industry, is there's some flexibility in the way of doing business. This is very dependent on resources and management. But if you look at the cow-calf operation, now while we expect lower prices in the fall when most of those calves will be marketed, we haven't got there yet. So the time is on the side of the cow-calf producer. Also, cow-calf producers have potential for retained ownership or potentially weaning early. So there's some flexibility, I think, in that production and marketing that does benefit the cattle producer. Now, this is obviously very dependent on finances, cash flow, has potential tax implications, and all of those issues. But I think overall, you could look at different sectors, I think, may be able to weather this a little bit better than others, given different aspects of their production.
And we haven't really even talked about exports for beef and pork. Any guesses as to the impacts we'll see here?
Sure. So I think when you look at exports, they were close to, if not record strong, to start 2020. Now, I think when you look at the weekly data, it still shows that exports have remained fairly strong. And that's really due to, really, I think, a lot of the trade deals and momentum we've had the last couple of years, and also shows really the ability of both producers of the meat products and consumers to adjust in this marketplace. So even though we're all under movement restrictions and guidelines, we're still able to consume the products that we desire. And the export data, I think even when you look at the domestic data, really bores that out, that we're still consuming these products. It's maybe a little bit more of a challenge to get it there, but we're still seeing relatively strong demand.
And finally, Lee, this can be for beef or pork producers. Any marketing or risk management decisions you want to leave us with today that you haven't talked about?
I heard a great comment from a fellow livestock economist, Darrell Peel, out of Oklahoma State, and well, his comment was, we need to think about how to keep this a bad year rather than the last year. And so that goes to all what we talked about of possibly making some changes, production changes to your operation to be a little bit flexible. Understanding that a lot of the typical price risk management strategies that we have in our toolbox have long left us in this current marketplace, but there still might be some when we look at deferred markets, and we might have to dig deep of looking at potentially selling futures and buying a call, kind of a synthetic put to allow for that higher base price, but still allow for some upside in the market. I think an important thing I want to highlight as we end here is it's very important that we don't back up this supply. And so what the issue there is, I think, while the system we've maintained that continuity of business, I think there's some potential there that we could see some slowing. And it's very important to remain current in our marketing. So, there's been some questions about should we delay some of these marketings, add some days on feed, increase weights. Now, depending on how the markets shake out, that could benefit the individual producer. When we look at the industry as a whole, we need to keep this supply really moving through the chain.
Thanks also to Lee for being on the show this week. And next week, we'll be joined by Darren Newsom in the market analyst seat. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we've begun a new month, and I know planting is on the mind of lots of folks. How's the forecast look?
Well, Troy, we have definitely seen spring-like weather in these last 2 weeks since we've been on the air with our last forecast, and we've seen the typical spring movement from blizzard activity to 70-degree weather. And we've seen it this last week with several days in the 70s, only to get the snowstorm in. Comes in Thursday night, and we dealt with some of the freezing rain. Now we're going to be back up on to the slide toward warmer temperatures with yet another system coming in as we go into next week. So it is spring. We are seeing our daily average soil temperatures, bare soil temperatures depth at 4 inches across the state at the end of the month and moved into the low 50s right along the southern border. We're baking in the mid to upper 40s, I-80 corridor southward, in the lower to mid 40s as we get the I-80 corridor northward. So we have warmed up considerably over the last couple of weeks. Looking at the upper air models, a big thing we'll draw your attention to is another upper air low coming into the western United States. That means some active weather is probably in store for the central U.S. Southwest flow aloft. We should stay fairly dry today, even though we show a surface low basically in the southeastern Colorado. It looks like most of the moisture will be basically streaming in the mid layers and will primarily affect areas to the south and east of us. We don't expect any precipitation, but as we go into tomorrow, we'll see this trough starting to deepen. It'll start to eject out little pieces of energy in the mid layers of the atmosphere. Surface low once again in southeastern Colorado. We may get just enough moisture to generate a few pop-up showers in southeast Nebraska, but I think that's kind of iffy. The main precipitation bands will be over the northern Rockies. Now you see this low starting to split away from the northern stream, and this makes things a little bit more interesting as that low sits in the desert southwest with that surface low. We get two lows centered over northeastern Wyoming and western Kansas. The primary action during this period will be over the southwest with that upper air low. It will start to slide toward the Texas region, and the cold air will start moving in as we get into late Tuesday. So we get high pressure pushing to the south, surface low over southeastern portions of Colorado. May get enough moisture to start generating a few showers. The biggest constraint will be if we get thunderstorm development in Texas, shutting off the moisture. On Wednesday, we get a big, deeper cold flow. And maybe people see some of the coldest air of the week, stretching portions of northeastern Nebraska as high cold pressure filters in. That's going to keep that surface low and upper air low caught in the southwest. Flurry activity across most of the upper Midwest, possibly into northeastern Nebraska. On Thursday, we start to see this trough lift. The upper air low starts to push out of the southwest into western Texas. We'll have to watch this because we'll start to see moisture feeding up, and we have mid-layer low pressure system moving through with surface lows in Nebraska. We'll probably see some generation of pretty significant moisture in the southern Rockies. And then as the system moves into eastern Texas, we'll watch to see if any of the residual moisture will make it up into southeast Nebraska as cold high pressure starts to move into our region, keeping the brunt of the very cold temperatures to our north. You can see that precipitation shield sliding ever so closely to southern Nebraska, potentially hitting us Friday night into Sunday morning. Further out, we look to see colder temperatures. Another trough moves in the western United States, above normal to the southeastern portions of our region. In terms of precipitation, with that system ejecting out, very heavy precipitation likely over the northern plains and the northern Rockies. I think we will see more of the drier conditions across the vast majority of the state, but certainly a very active pattern is a store as we go to the end of this 7 to 10 day period. So Troy overall is looking warmer, but very active weather is in store as we go through this next 7 to 10 day period.
Thanks, Al. Next up, farming and ranching have evolved in countless ways in the last several decades. However, one component of that evolution that's somewhat overlooked is the ever-growing utilization of social media platforms in the various ag industries. Market Journal's Bill Dodd has the story.
Growing up in a world of message boards and dial-up internet, I've seen the internet grow in simply unimaginable ways. On that note, the advent of social media has given rise to an entirely new avenue of connectivity, perfectly suited for people to publish and gather information or just share some personal insights. In a world that's become so fast-paced, where we can order virtually anything we want and be greeted with a package on our doorstep overnight, is a pretty big step from ordering that perfect gift via catalog, if anyone even remembers what those are. But the point is, with such a fast-paced way of life, the disconnect between producers and consumers seems to have grown in many ways. I had the opportunity to speak with social media expert Natalie Kovarik at this year's Women in Ag conference, and she tells me with the use of social media, many industries are given an opportunity to share and grow their image and brand, while simultaneously closing the social divides between those who make the products and those who purchase them.
I think it's doing a very good job of connecting producers and consumers back together. I think, unfortunately, society, we've kind of drifted away, and there is just a disconnect and kind of a little bit of a gap. And producers now are stepping up, and they're using the platforms of social media to help kind of bridge that and tell their story and kind of share what's going on in rural America with those that aren't privy to seeing it every day. That's the beautiful thing about social media. You can use the platform for a lot of different things. If you simply just want to get on there and share your story and show, the humanity that goes into raising beef, or what goes into, planting fields and what we do every day as ranchers and farmers, it's a beautiful platform to, visually to tell that and just show up and actually show people. But there's also ways to monetize. And you can make income from, which is really big for some ranching and farming operations, to have a little bit of an off-ranch income.
It seems like there's some type of new social media platform for people in industries to utilize popping up online on a daily basis. While this means of communication is still in its upward trend, people have a seemingly infinite choice of which platform will best suit their needs. However, the choice you make on the platforms to participate on are entirely up to you. In the long run, there really isn't a wrong choice, and in many ways, it boils down to your personal preferences.
I think so. I think they all kind of have their own little different niche. I mean, I do think across the board there's a lot of similarities between the different platforms. I think it's kind of what you're drawn to. I am most active on Instagram and YouTube, and those are the kind of the two that I choose to spend my time on. But that's not to say that you can't have a very large influence and do a good job of sharing on different ones like Twitter and Facebook and all the other ones. So I think it's just kind of what you're drawn to and what connects with you about the difference between them.
While social media has become a social normalcy in everyday life, that doesn't mean everyone interacts in the most courteous or socially acceptable ways. While social media is filled with wonderful stories and images, the anonymity provided to any given social media platform members do inevitably produce some very harsh interactions between people and gives internet trolls a handful of verbal ammunition. With that in mind, Natalie did have some very specific do's and don'ts to share about your social media practices.
I think do's are serving your audience, being there, showing up for the people that are there, following you, supporting you, engaging with you. And I think a big do is also turning it into a community and really viewing those people that are choosing to follow you and give you their time, as a person, and recognizing and connecting with them. Don'ts, I think we have to be better about sharing our stories in encouraging ways. I know a lot of people have trouble relating to people in ranching and farming because we're so set in our ways, or we take offense to things and we're very passionate about things. And I think we just have to be better about. My good friend Amanda Radke, she's really big into advocating, and she always talks about finding common ground and really connecting with people before we even start talking about ranching and farming and the statistics and all the things we want to share about it. But really just kind of being more approachable.
For those who missed their opportunity to hear Natalie speak at this year's Women in Ag conference, I wanted to leave you with her thoughts on why this is an important topic and what she wanted attendees to walk away with after her presentation.
Just that everyone has a story to share from agriculture, and that to really encourage and empower people to share that. We make up, the people in agriculture make up about 2% of the population. And that's very minuscule when you think of it in the grand scale compared to the 98% that aren't on a ranch or aren't on a farm or just removed from that lifestyle. And so I just want to be here to encourage people to utilize the platform of social media to really tell and share their story.
As the trend of social media keeps following its upward momentum, the opportunities to grow your personal image and brand will continue to be an integral part of how people and businesses interact for the foreseeable future. If anything is evident, it's the fact that social media has become a platform for the masses, and that includes industries like agriculture. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Finally today, Nebraska Extension is on the lookout for youth who love innovation and corn. For the 8th year, 4-Hers and FFA members have a chance to win cash with the 2020 Innovative Youth Corn Challenge. Teams plant plots and throughout the growing season develop an innovative practice with the goal of achieving a yield increase on that plot. Awards will also be given to teams excelling in crop scouting and sustainability. Nebraska Extension Educator Brandy VanDeWalle explains more.
So the whole goal of the Nebraska Innovative Youth Corn Challenge is to help get youth more involved with science, technology, engineering, and math careers. We all know that those, the STEM careers, as we call it, is in such a high demand. And so this helps engage youth in crop science education and helps them go through an on-farm research practice, just like the adult producers do with our Nebraska on-farm research. This particular competition helps producers because we have, for the past several years, had participants actually compete in some of the programs and do some of the same on-farm research that some of our Nebraska adult producers have participated in. For example, in 2019, the Cornhusker Kids team, which is the team that won the competition, they actually did a Project Sense, which is what a lot of our Nebraska producers participated in. So we're able to use that data that's been randomized and replicated and transfer that information to our Nebraska on-farm research results. So these kids are doing some very cutting-edge research that's not exactly easy to do. They're kind of the cream of the crop. If you'd say they have really gone through a lot of research in order to complete their projects.
You can find more information about the Innovative Youth Corn Challenge and how to register on the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, you can download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can also get the latest updates on coronavirus at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.